Hello, welcome to Ancient Civilizations, Greece and Rome. My name is Scott Prophet, and for the next 8 weeks we'll be exploring the history and culture of two of the most important civilizations in all of humankind. Well, let's dive right into it, shall we? Let's talk a bit about Greece first. When we think about Greece, it's probably best to think about Greece as it exists on the political map today. It's a place in the southern Balkan Peninsula. It also extends into the Aegean Islands, as far down south as Crete. What is Greece? Is it a place where myth happens? Is it a place where there are really, really impressive old buildings, such as the Parthenon here on the Acropolis in Athens? It's also famous for its art, such as this red figure vase. Is it a place with men with really long robes and even longer beards talk about philosophy? Is it a place where soldiers, great soldiers, used to live and defended their country versus all outsiders? Is it an idealized version like we see in Hollywood movies? Here's Leonidas again in 300. Is it a place where myth came from? All of these things are true enough to an extent. Let's move along now to the Roman Empire. As you can see on the map here, I've got the Roman Empire stretching as far in the west as Spain and modern-day Morocco, all the way to Mesopotamia in the east, as far south as Egypt, and as far north as England. It's a big empire, and it stretches over an even longer span of time if we think about it that way, all the way from 753 BCE to 1453 CE. It's mighty impressive. But who are the Romans? Well, you might think of important leaders such as Julius Caesar, most famously depicted in William Shakespeare's play of the same name. You might think of warriors fighting in the arena or chariot races. You might think of the Colosseum itself in Rome, home to arena fighting. And none of these thoughts about either of these cultures are wrong. As we're going to discover in the next 8 weeks, actually there's a lot right about these depictions. So that's a little bit about Greece and a little bit about Rome. But let's talk about the concept of history itself too. What kinds of literature are there? Well, a lot of us read fiction, be it in the form of regular novels, graphic novels, plain old comic books. There's poetry, either lyric or epic. There's religious literature, such as the Bible or the Quran. There's history. We'll be talking more about that in a minute. There's philosophy, which deals with such topics as being and time. There's how-to. Just the other day, I had to rewire a light switch. I had to consult a how-to book to figure out how to do that. There's journalism. Newspapers and blogs are part of this. There's also social media, things like Facebook and Twitter. These are all part of literary tradition in the modern world. But let's zero in on history for a moment. What is history? According to Herodotus, the man who invented it in the 5th century BCE, historia is a learning by inquiry, knowledge or information obtained by inquiry, or a narration of what has been learned, a historical narrative. That's not too different from the modern definition as put forth by the American Heritage Dictionary, which tells us that history is a narrative of events or a story. That makes good enough sense, right? Or a chronological record of events as the development of a people or institution. So, history of the Cleveland Browns, for example, or the history of the Baltimore Ravens, for example, often including an explanation of or commentary on these events. And this is a good definition, it's a good starting point, but it deserves some unpacking, so let's do that for a second. History then typically involves a story or narrative of events. Who doesn't like a good story? Deals with the development of a people or an institution. In other words, we find out how people or an institution got from one place to another, how it changed over time. And it gives an explanation for why the events described in the narrative happened in the way they did. I think that before I got to college, I thought that history was just a list of one thing that happened after another. Maybe I wasn't so interested in that. But I took a couple of good classes that changed my opinion of this. And it was this last part of the definition of history that was put forth in these classes that really hooked me. It gives an explanation for why the events described in the narrative happened the way they did. So, it's all about how we explain why what happened happened. That is, history is not just one thing after another. The author must advance a theory or an opinion about why things happened as they did. And remember how I mentioned that Greek guy, Herodotus, a minute ago, invented history. Well, this is how he invents history. Other people before him had talked about what happened over the span of time. Herodotus does something totally new. He puts forth a theory based on evidence in a more or less scientific way, explaining why things happened the way they did. Now, it's imperfect, and we'll talk more about that later. I say it's more or less scientific. Doesn't really meet the criteria for that in the modern sense, but he's doing something that's based on the evidence before him and putting forth an opinion based on the best evidence. And that's what each of us are going to do in this class over the next 8 weeks. It's not just about what I'm telling you or what the textbook's telling you. It's about what you do with the evidence in front of you and to show me what you learn. And I'm eager to see you involved in this process. Now let's talk about the course very briefly and talk about why you should buy the textbook that is on the syllabus. There's an older version of Ralph Matheson's Ancient Mediterranean Civilizations, and it's quite good, and it's quite cheap. It's only $23. That's pretty good for an 8-week course. However, I implore you to buy his most recent version, which came out a couple of years ago, Ancient Mediterranean Civilizations, 2nd edition. At your bookstore at the University of Baltimore, it's $35 for a used, and as many as $59 for a new copy. This seems a little steep, but consider this is the only text you have to buy for this class. It's quite a bargain, and it's a very good textbook. Okay, so that's the textbook. But where's the real excitement in this class? That's the primary sources. Let's have a look at just a couple that we'll be sampling over the course of these next 8 weeks. You'll be getting a handout form with links that are on the course website, links to Homer and his Odyssey. Homer wrote this poem in the 8th century BCE. He was Greek and is said to have been blind. He was from the island of Chios, which is off the coast of modern-day Turkey. And he didn't really write the poems we'll be talking about so much as sing them. Later on they were copied down. He wrote the Iliad around 750 and he composed the Odyssey around 725. We'll be discussing Tyrtaeus, who was a Spartan poet who lived in the 600s BCE. Not only did he live in Sparta, he lived as a warrior in Sparta and is best known for his war poetry. We'll be reading excerpts from Publius Vergilius Maro's Aeneid. Publius Vergilius Maro is best known to you as Virgil, who wrote, according to T.S. Eliot, the all-time classic of Europe. He was a Roman poet who wrote in Latin, and is a member of a circle of poets referred to as the Neoterics. At first, he started writing a lot shorter poems than what had been written before, but later he was hired by the Emperor Augustus to write epic poetry about what it meant to be a Roman. We'll also be reading a bit of Livy. Titus Livius lived from 59 BCE to 17 CE, and he also wrote in Latin. He lived around the same time as Virgil, and he wrote something called the Ab Urbe Condita, a history of Rome from its mythological foundations with Romulus and Remus, all the way down to the year 9 BCE. I think you're going to enjoy this class, and if you signed up for this, I think it's because you wanted something a little different. I think you're going to like what we read, and I think you're going to like the discussions we have. I look forward to hearing more from you as time goes on. Stay tuned for more lectures.